When my husband first said those words, "She just needs our help for a while," I believed him. I always believed him. But looking back now, I realize that was the first time I mistook guilt for love. It was a Sunday morning in late autumn, the kind of day when sunlight spills through the blinds like golden threads, and the house smells faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. I was folding towels on the couch when Daniel came into the living room, rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did before saying something big. He didn't sit down right away, just hovered there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Lena," he said, "I need to talk to you about something important." Those words, something important, can mean so many things in a marriage. Sometimes it's a bill, sometimes it's something far worse. He sat beside me finally, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of sawdust on his shirt. He'd been working late again at the shop. "It's about my sister," he said, "about Rachel." Rachel. The name alone stirred a complicated knot in my chest. I didn't dislike her, not exactly, but she'd always been the kind of woman who thrived in chaos, charming, magnetic, reckless, the kind of person who walked into a room and made everyone else clean up after her. "What about her?" I asked, carefully neutral. He sighed, eyes cast down. "She's in trouble again. This time it's serious. She's pregnant, Lena, and she says she can't keep the baby." I froze mid-fold. "Can't keep it? What do you mean? She's not ready. No job, no stability. You know how she's been." He glanced up, searching my face. "She asked me for help." I set the towel aside. "What kind of help?" Then he said it, the thing that changed the course of our lives. "She wants us to adopt the baby." At first I laughed, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. "Daniel, that's a big decision. She can't just—" "I know." He cut me off softly. "But think about it. We've talked about having kids. Maybe this is how it's meant to happen." I looked at him then, really looked, the earnestness in his eyes, the gentle insistence in his voice. Daniel had always been the steady one, the fixer. When my father died, he was the one who repaired the leaky roof and paid the funeral bills before I even asked. So when he said, "She needs us," I believed him. Still, a small voice inside me whispered, "Why now? Why her?" But I ignored it, because love, I've learned, sometimes makes you silence your own intuition. For the next few weeks, everything moved faster than I expected. Rachel stayed with us, her belly round and glowing against the gray knit sweater I lent her. She was softer than I remembered. Tired, yes, but there was a calm about her I hadn't seen before. We'd sit at the kitchen table late at night, drinking chamomile tea, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. "Are you sure about this, Rachel?" I asked one night, unable to hide my concern. "You'll be okay giving the baby up?" She smiled, a little too easily. "It's better this way. The baby will have a real home, a good one. You and Danny, you're perfect for that." I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone, the way her eyes flickered when she said home, unsettled me. A week before her due date, Daniel brought home a crib. He built it himself, humming under his breath, his tools scattered across the living room floor. Watching him, I felt a wave of affection and fear, because love that comes with uncertainty feels like standing on thin ice. You hear the cracks before you fall. Rachel went into labor early one morning in February. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the yard in white silence. The hospital lights were too bright, too sterile, the air too cold. I remember holding her hand through the contractions, wiping her forehead, whispering, "You're doing great, Rachel." Almost there. When the baby finally arrived, a little girl with dark hair and lungs strong enough to fill the ward, something inside me shifted. I cried, not because she was mine, but because she existed, because she was a piece of all of us, and I didn't yet understand what that meant. Rachel looked exhausted, but she smiled faintly. "Name her. Whatever you want," she murmured, closing her eyes. I thought she'd want to hold the baby, but she turned away. Within 24 hours, she was gone, discharged, bags packed, leaving behind a note on the nightstand that simply said, "Thank you. I need time." That was it. No goodbye, no explanation. Daniel told me not to worry. She just needs space. She'll come around, but weeks turned into months. No calls, no visits, only silence. We named the baby Grace. Grace grew fast, her laugh filling our small home like sunlight spilling through a dusty window. I fell in love with her so deeply, it scared me. I'd trace the little curls at the back of her neck, whispering, "You're ours now, sweetheart. You're safe." Daniel worked longer hours. He said he was saving for Grace's future, but sometimes when I called the shop, they said he'd left early. I brushed it off. Exhaustion can make you suspicious of anything. One night, after putting Grace to bed, I found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of papers spread out in front of him. He looked up too quickly when I entered, his expression carefully neutral. "What's all that?" I asked. "Just bills," he said, "work stuff." But when he turned the papers face down, I saw a flash of something. A seal, a signature, and Rachel's name printed in bold letters. I didn't ask. I should have. But love, especially long love, teaches you the art of waiting until it's too late. The next morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Daniel, but the handwriting was Rachel's, looping and elegant, the way she used to sign birthday cards. I set it on the counter, meaning to tell him, but curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of me. I opened it, and what I read made my stomach twist into knots. "Daniel, I hope the transfer went through. Once the estate finalizes, we'll both get our share. Just remember our agreement. Keep Lena out of this. She doesn't need to know what's hers was never really hers. Take care of the baby. I'll be in touch once things settle down." My hands trembled so hard the letter nearly slipped from my fingers. Our share? Keep Lena out of this? What did that mean? I looked over at Grace's crib in the corner of the living room. She was sleeping peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling. For the first time since she came into our lives, I felt fear. Not for her, but for what she represented. I knew then that Daniel's sister hadn't given up her baby out of love. She had given her up out of convenience. And whatever agreement they had, I was never meant to find out. I must have read that letter a dozen times, each word blurred and sharpened again like it was playing tricks on me. Our share. Keep Lena out of this. The sentences were simple, but together they felt like a slap across the face. I sat at that kitchen table until the coffee went cold and the clock ticked past midnight. Daniel came home around 1. His boots scuffed the floor, his keys hit the counter. Small sounds that suddenly felt deafening. "Hey," he said softly, "you're still up?" I looked at him, my mouth dry. "I found a letter." He froze mid-step. "What letter?" "From Rachel." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The quiet was heavy enough. She said something about the estate, a transfer, and that you two have a share. For a moment, his face emptied of color. Then he forced a small, shaky laugh. "Lena, it's nothing, just paperwork. She's finalizing Mom's estate, remember? You know how messy that's been." I held his gaze. "Then why would she say to keep me out of it?" He looked down, rubbed his temple. "Because you get anxious, Lena. You worry about everything. I told her not to involve you until it's settled." There it was, the soft condescension of a man who knew how to make a woman doubt herself. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. So I let him wrap his arms around me, let him whisper, "It's fine, sweetheart. Trust me." But that night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every conversation, every little lie I'd ignored, because it was easier to love him than to suspect him. Over the next few weeks, I became an actress in my own home. I smiled at breakfast, kissed him goodbye, and tucked Grace into her crib as if nothing was wrong. But inside, something was unraveling. Daniel had a locked drawer in his study, one I'd never touched. He said it was for work documents. I'd respected that boundary for years, until one afternoon when I found the key taped under his desk. Inside were folders, legal ones with tabs and stamps. The first one I opened had Rachel's name and the words Inheritance Division printed across the top. My eyes raced over the pages. Their late mother's house, savings accounts, a small piece of farmland upstate. All of it had been liquidated, and there, at the bottom, 2 signatures, Rachel Collins and Daniel Collins. Under beneficiary acknowledgement, my name was absent. Instead, there was a note in the margin in Daniel's handwriting. Keep Lena off the paperwork until after custody approval. Custody approval. I suddenly understood. The adoption wasn't just about saving Rachel's baby. It was about hiding money, funneling their mother's estate into their names while using me as the good wife cover. Rachel couldn't legally claim everything if she was giving up a child, and Daniel couldn't do it without looking like he was taking advantage. So they'd created this picture-perfect narrative, the altruistic couple rescuing a baby. I felt sick, the kind of sickness that starts in your stomach and spreads to your bones. Grace whimpered in her crib as if she sensed it, that the world she'd been brought into wasn't built on love, but deceit. That evening, I made dinner as usual. Roasted chicken, potatoes, salad. Daniel talked about work, about how things were finally looking up. I nodded, smiled, poured his wine. Then I said quietly, "I found your files." He stopped chewing. "What files?" "The ones about your mother's estate. The ones that say my name doesn't belong." His fork clinked against the plate. "You went through my things?" I didn't flinch. "I did." He leaned back, exhaling hard. "You had no right, Lena." "I had every right," I said, voice steady. "You lied to me." About Rachel, about Grace, about everything. He rubbed his forehead, muttered something under his breath. Then softer, "It's not what you think." "Then tell me," I said. "Make me understand." He hesitated, his eyes darting to Grace's high chair. She was gumming a piece of bread, blissfully unaware of the storm between us. Finally, he said, "Rachel couldn't claim the inheritance because she was under investigation for fraud. Mom's assets would have been frozen, so I helped her transfer them. Temporarily, I did it to protect her. And the adoption?" My voice cracked. "Was that to protect her too?" His jaw clenched. "The adoption made it easier, legally. It kept the social worker from digging into her finances. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone, but it did," I whispered. "It hurt me. It used me. You made me believe we were doing something good." He looked down, shame flickering across his face. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Get this far?" I laughed, the kind of bitter laugh that sounds more like a sob. "We have a child now, Daniel. A little girl. She calls me Mommy. What do you think happens when she grows up and learns she was part of a cover-up?" He didn't answer, just stared at the table, the wine glass trembling slightly in his hand. That night, I packed Grace's diaper bag and drove to my sister's house. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. For 3 days, I stayed there, feeding Grace, rocking her to sleep, wondering if love could survive a lie that deep. My sister kept asking what happened, but I couldn't find the words. Because how do you explain that your marriage, your motherhood, might all be built on a transaction? On the 4th day, Daniel showed up. He stood at the door, eyes hollow, voice low. "Lena, please. Come home. We can fix this." I didn't move. "You don't get to say we anymore." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Rachel's gone." She took what she wanted and disappeared. I was trying to protect you from that too. I studied his face, the guilt, the exhaustion, the traces of a man I once trusted. Protect me? You brought her into our lives. You let me raise her baby, thinking it was an act of love. He swallowed hard. But you do love her, don't you? That question broke something in me, because he was right. I did love her, more than anything. Grace was innocent in all this, but I couldn't unsee the web of lies she was tangled in. I love her enough to tell her the truth, I said, even if it destroys you. That night, after he left, I sat by Grace's crib and watched her sleep. The moonlight fell across her tiny hand clutching the blanket. She looked so peaceful, untouched by the weight of adult sins. I knew then what I had to do. If Daniel and Rachel had built their scheme on my silence, then the only way to end it was to speak. And once I did, nothing in our family, or in that inheritance, would ever be the same again. The next morning, I drove to our lawyer's office with Grace, buckled in her car seat. The roads were slick with rain, the kind that makes everything look like it's melting. Buildings, trees, even your own reflection in the glass. I'd known our family attorney, Mr. Garner, for years. He handled my father's will, our mortgage, even our taxes. A kind, gray-haired man who always spoke as if every word was chosen carefully. When I walked in with Grace on my hip, he looked surprised. "Lena," he said, standing up quickly, "is everything all right?" I set Grace down gently on the couch with a few toys, then turned to him. "I need to see any documents with my name. Adoption papers, estate transfers, property listings, all of it." He hesitated. "Those are Daniel's family's private—" "I'm his wife," I interrupted, my voice steady, "and I think I've been deceived." That word, deceived, hung in the air like smoke. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Give me a minute." When he returned, he carried a thin folder. Inside were copies of the adoption documents notarized and signed. My signature was there. The neat cursive I'd practiced since high school. But beneath mine, where Daniel should have been, was another name I didn't expect. Rachel Collins. I frowned. Why is her name here? She signed as a witness. Mr. Garner adjusted his glasses. No, she signed as co-guardian. The arrangement stated that, in the event of marital separation or death, custody would revert to the biological mother. The room spun. Wait, custody would revert? You mean if Daniel and I split, she could take Grace? He looked at me with something close to pity. Technically, yes. Unless the agreement was amended, it hadn't been. I knew that much. My hands began to tremble. She planned this from the start, I whispered. She gave us her baby to get the inheritance money and then built a way to take her back once she'd cleaned her slate. Mr. Garner's eyes softened. Lena, you may want to seek independent counsel. Quickly, I nodded numbly, thanked him, and left before he could say more. Outside, the rain had stopped, but everything still glistened. The cars, the street, my own tears as they mixed with the damp air. That evening I returned home. The house felt foreign, like stepping into a stranger's life. Daniel was sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, a half-empty glass beside him. He looked up as I entered. You went to Garner. Yes, I said simply. I know about the custody clause. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. Lena, please. Don't. My voice was calm but sharp. Just tell me one thing. Did you know about it? He hesitated. And that was answer enough. I took a step closer. You let me believe this baby was ours. You let me fall in love with her, knowing she could be taken away. How could you do that to me? He rubbed his face, looking smaller somehow. Rachel said she'd never actually take her back. It was just a formality. In case something happened the moment you lied, I said, and now it's all unraveling. He stood abruptly, his voice rising. I didn't have a choice, Lena. Rachel was drowning. Our mother's estate was tangled in lawsuits, and the only way to save it was to make it look like she was giving something up. You think I wanted this? I stared at him. No, Daniel. You didn't want this. You wanted the money, and you thought I'd never find out. He stepped toward me, desperate. I did it for us? I shook my head. No, you did it for her. You've always done everything for her. He fell silent. There it was. The truth we'd both known but never said. His loyalty to Rachel was the one thing I could never compete with. That night, after he went to bed, I sat in the nursery with Grace. The walls were pale yellow, painted by my own hands during the months I thought we were building a family. Her tiny clothes hung neatly in the closet. I'd folded them with such hope. Now they felt like evidence, reminders of a life I hadn't chosen. I whispered, I don't know how to protect you from this. But maybe I did. Maybe the only way to protect her was to make everything come to light, no matter what it cost me. The next morning, I called Rachel. It took 3 tries before she answered. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful. Lena, wow, it's been a while. Cut the act, Rachel, I said quietly. I know everything about the estate, about the adoption clause, about how you and Daniel used me. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear her sharp intake of breath. Then, he told you. I found out on my own. Her tone hardened. Look, I don't know what you think you found, but... Stop. My voice trembled, but I didn't let it break. You lied to me. You handed me that baby like she was a gift, when really she was a shield. You used my heart to protect your money. Her silence was colder than words. I'm going public, I said. I'm taking this to court. I'll tell them everything. She laughed then, a short, bitter sound. And risk losing Grace? You think they'll let you keep her when she's biologically mine? You can't win this, Lena. Maybe not, but something in me had shifted from fear to resolve. We'll see, I said, and hung up. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and sleepless nights. My lawyer, a sharp, kind woman named Miriam, helped me file for sole custody, arguing that the adoption was obtained under fraudulent pretense. Daniel received the summons a week later. He didn't call. Rachel, however, did. Over and over, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening. Once she said, "You're making a mistake. You'll regret it." But the only thing I regretted was trusting them. The case became the talk of our small town. People whispered at the grocery store, at church, even outside the daycare. Everyone had an opinion, but no one knew the full story. Only I did, and I was done keeping it quiet. When the first hearing came, Daniel showed up looking exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Rachel sat 2 rows behind him, sunglasses perched on her head like armor. The judge asked questions, mostly about the intent of the adoption. Daniel tried to explain, but every sentence tied him tighter in his own contradictions. Finally, Miriam stood and said, "Your Honor, the petitioner believes the adoption was executed under manipulation and deceit, using emotional coercion to obtain both legal and financial advantage. My client was misled into a guardianship arrangement that jeopardizes the welfare of the child and her own rights as a parent." The room was silent. Rachel shifted in her seat, her composure cracking. I sat there holding Grace in my lap and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Strength. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that endures. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm. Pending further review, temporary full custody remains with Mrs. Collins. I exhaled shakily, tears slipping down my cheeks. It wasn't over, but it was a start. That night, Daniel came by the house. He stood on the porch, eyes red, shoulders sagging. "Lena," he said, "I'm sorry." "For what?" I asked. "For lying. For using me or for losing control of the story?" He looked down. All of it. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But some wounds don't close with apologies. "You need to go, Daniel," I said quietly. "Grace and I are finally safe. Please don't take that from us." He nodded, his lips trembling. "I understand." As he walked away into the dark, I felt both grief and relief twist together inside me, two sides of the same truth. The house felt emptier after Daniel left, not because of his absence, but because silence had finally returned. Real silence. Not the kind that hides tension behind forced smiles or polite laughter, but the kind that lets you breathe. Grace's laughter filled the spaces where his voice used to echo. Her giggles when I spun her around, the way her tiny hands reached for my face. Those moments reminded me what all this fighting was for. Still, the nights were the hardest. That's when doubt crept in, whispering, "What if Rachel wins? What if Grace is taken from you?" I'd sit by the window after putting Grace to bed, watching the streetlights flicker against the wet pavement. Sometimes I'd imagine the life I thought I had, the family dinners, the shared secrets, the warmth of Daniel's arm draped over mine. Then I'd remember that none of it was real. It was built on deceit. I was learning painfully that love without honesty is just illusion. 3 weeks later, Rachel showed up at my door. No warning, no call. When I opened it, she was standing there in a designer coat, hair perfect as ever, but her eyes were tired. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. She stepped inside, looking around as if she'd forgotten what the house looked like. "You've redecorated," she murmured. "I had to," I said flatly. "Too many ghosts." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once served her dinner, the night she handed me that swaddled baby. Grace was asleep upstairs, and for a moment the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Rachel finally spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Then why did you?" I asked. She sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Because everything was falling apart. After Mom died, the estate was a mess. The inheritance was tied up in probate and my creditors were circling. The only way to protect what was left was to make myself look unfit." "So you gave up your baby," I said quietly. "You handed her to me, your sister-in-law, like she was a pawn." Rachel winced. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you, Lena. You were the only one I trusted." I laughed bitterly. "Trusted enough to use." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. I thought I'd fix it later. I thought I could come back and make it right once the money was safe. But then you—" She stopped herself. "Then I what?" I pressed. "You fell in love with her," she said softly, and suddenly it wasn't simple anymore. I stared at her, anger rising, but beneath it, something else. Pity, maybe, because for all her scheming, Rachel looked broken. "You could have told me the truth," I said. "I would have helped you. We could have found another way." She shook her head. "I didn't want you to see me like that." Desperate. Weak, I stood up slowly. "You let me think I was saving a child, but all along you were saving yourself." Her voice cracked. "I know. And I'll never forgive myself for that." There was sincerity in her tone, but remorse doesn't erase betrayal. "Rachel," I said quietly, "if you really mean that, then stop fighting me. Let Grace stay. Let her grow up in peace." She looked down, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. "I can't," she whispered. "She's my daughter." "And she's my child," I said, "maybe not by blood, but by everything that matters." We stood there in silence, two women bound by one little girl, and a chain of lies neither of us could undo. Rachel turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You're stronger than I thought," she said. "I had to be," I replied. "You left me no choice." She nodded faintly, then walked away. When the door clicked shut, I leaned against it, my legs trembling. I'd faced her. But the battle wasn't over. Weeks passed. The court hearings dragged on. Rachel's lawyers argued biology. Mine argued intent and welfare. The media caught wind of it, calling it the sisters' baby scandal. I hated every headline, every whisper, but through it all, Grace thrived. She learned to walk, her wobbly steps echoing through the hall. She started saying, "Mama." And every time she did, my heart swelled and broke all at once. One morning, I found an envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a check, half of Rachel's inheritance, and a note in her handwriting. For Grace. "You were always her real mother. I'm sorry." Our eyes sat on the porch, staring at the paper as the sun came up. For a long time, I didn't move. I just let the warmth wash over me. Maybe this was her way of surrendering. Maybe it was her way of saying goodbye. The final hearing came in spring. The air smelled like rain and lilac, that sweet scent of something ending and beginning all at once. Rachel wasn't there. Her lawyer read a statement instead, withdrawing her custody claim. The judge nodded solemnly and said the words I'd been waiting to hear. "Full and permanent custody is hereby granted to Lena Collins." My knees nearly gave out. I didn't cry right away. Not until I strapped Grace into her car seat afterward, and she looked up at me with those wide, curious eyes. I whispered, "It's just us now, baby." Her tiny fingers reached for mine, and in that moment, every sleepless night, every tear, every courtroom fight, it all felt worth it. When we got home, I opened the windows. Sunlight spilled into the living room, dust motes dancing in the air. I set Grace down and watched her toddle toward her toys, her laughter filling every corner of the house. That sound, that innocent joy, was my victory. Not revenge, not money, just peace. Later, I packed away the old files, the adoption papers, the court transcripts, even Rachel's note. I tucked them into a box and labeled it "for when she's ready." Because one day, Grace will ask where she came from, and when she does, I'll tell her the truth, all of it. Not to shame anyone, but to teach her what love really means, the kind that fights without bitterness, that protects without control, the kind that survives betrayal and still chooses compassion. That night, as I rocked her to sleep, I whispered, "You were never a mistake, my darling. You were my saving grace," and maybe she didn't understand the words, but she smiled in her sleep, as if she did. The story could have ended there, with the court granting me custody and Rachel walking away quietly. But life doesn't tidy itself up so neatly. The ripples of what happened spread farther than I expected. People talk, especially in small towns like ours. Some called me brave. Others whispered that I'd stolen a baby. The truth lived somewhere in the middle, like it always does. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to rebuild his image. After Rachel's withdrawal, he came by one last time, unannounced, of course, standing awkwardly on the porch like a stranger who'd lost his map. He looked thinner, older. The arrogance that used to cling to him had faded into something softer, or maybe just emptier. "I heard Rachel left the country," he said. I nodded. She needed a fresh start. He shifted his weight, eyes darting toward the door. "And Grace?" "She's doing well." I crossed my arms. "We both are." He gave a small, bitter smile. "You always were stronger than me." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. After a long silence, he said quietly, "I'm sorry, Lena. For everything." The apology hung between us, fragile and uncertain. Once upon a time, those words might have been enough to pull me back, but not now. "Daniel," I said gently, "sometimes sorry just comes too late." He looked down, nodded, and turned to leave. I watched him walk away, shoulders hunched, disappearing into the drizzle. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just release. That chapter of my life had closed. The months that followed were quieter. Grace grew taller, her words clearer. She'd toddle around the garden while I planted tomatoes, her laughter chasing the birds away. Every once in a while, I'd catch her humming, a tune I didn't recognize, and I'd think, she's making her own music now. There were days when memories tried to sneak back in, when I'd see a photo of Rachel in an old album or hear a song that used to play during those dinners we all shared. But pain dulls when it meets purpose. I'd tell myself, she gave me grace, even if it wasn't for the right reasons. And maybe that's the universe's strange way of balancing things. Then came a letter. It arrived one summer morning. No return address, just a clean envelope with my name written in Rachel's familiar script. Inside was a photograph. Rachel sitting on a park bench in what looked like Italy. She was holding a cup of coffee, smiling faintly at the camera. On the back, she'd written, "Tell her I'm doing better. Tell her she saved me too." I sat there for a long while staring at the photo, my emotions tangled. Sadness, forgiveness, gratitude. Because somehow, despite all the lies and pain, I believed her. She had saved me too, in her own twisted way. The next weekend, I took Grace to the park. The sun was warm, the grass thick with the scent of summer. She ran ahead, arms outstretched, chasing bubbles that shimmered like tiny rainbows. As I watched her, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Rachel had taken something from me, my trust, my marriage, my peace, but she'd also given me something greater, a reason to become someone stronger. Maybe forgiveness isn't about excusing what was done. Maybe it's about freeing yourself from the weight of what can't be undone. Grace tripped over her sandal, and I rushed to her side. She looked up at me, lip trembling, and said, "Mama, I fell." I smiled, brushing dirt from her knees. "Then we get up, sweetheart." We always get up. She grinned through her tears, and in that tiny smile, I saw my whole story reflected back. The pain, the resilience, the hope. That night, after putting her to bed, I sat by the window again. The same window where I'd once cried over Daniel's lies, where I'd prayed for answers that never came. Outside, the world was quiet. The cicadas hummed softly in the dark. I thought about the woman I'd been when all this began, the one who just wanted to help, who believed love alone could fix anything. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, it's okay to break, it's okay to rebuild, because healing isn't a single moment, it's 1,000 small choices. To stay kind, to stay open, to stay standing. I looked at Grace's crib, at her tiny chest rising and falling, and whispered a silent promise. You'll always know love that's real. Months later, I decided to move. Not far, just to a smaller town near the coast, a place where nobody knew my story, where Grace and I could start over. The day we left, I stood in the doorway one last time, letting the memories wash over me. The fights, the tears, the laughter, all of it. Then I closed the door gently and whispered, "Thank you." Not to Daniel or Rachel, but to the version of myself who refused to give up. The new house was smaller, but full of light. The walls smelled faintly of sea salt and paint. Grace's laughter bounced off them, new echoes for a new life. Every morning we'd walk along the beach, her tiny hand gripping mine. The waves would rush up to our feet, then retreat, like forgiveness itself, always coming back in softer ways. Sometimes, when she'd run ahead, I'd call out, "Don't go too far," and she'd turn, smile, and shout, "I won't, Mama." I'd believe her, because after everything, I'd learned that even when people drift away, the love you build, the kind that's earned through truth and pain, never really leaves. I kept Rachel's photo in a small wooden box on my nightstand, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof of transformation. We were all flawed. We all made mistakes. But some of us got a second chance to do better. Grace did. I did. Even Rachel, in her own way, did too. And sometimes, when the night air was still and Grace's soft breathing filled the room, I'd whisper a prayer. Not for revenge or justice, but gratitude. Because life didn't turn out the way I planned, it turned out the way it needed to. When I look back now, I don't see this story as one of betrayal. Not entirely. I see it as a story of awakening. I once believed that family meant loyalty by default, that love was enough to keep people honest, but I've learned that even the people closest to us can lie when they're scared or desperate. And sometimes their choices break us in ways they never intended. What matters is what we do after. I chose to protect a child who wasn't mine by blood, but who became my heart, my purpose, my truth. I chose to rebuild, even when the foundation I stood on was cracked. And in doing so, I discovered something stronger than anger or revenge. I found peace. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means refusing to let it define who you become. Rachel's deception could have hardened me, but instead it opened my eyes to the woman I am now, the mother I was meant to be. And maybe that's the lesson buried inside all of this. Life will test your heart in ways you never expect. People will hurt you, plans will fall apart. But if you can hold on to grace, your own kind of grace, you can rise again. I don't know what became of Rachel after that letter, or if she ever truly forgave herself, but I hope she found her peace too, because in the end, we were all just trying to find our way home, to love, to truth, to something real.